You're not demonstrating courage if you're not scared. My spiritual challenge to you is to practice being brave during this month of courage. Or you could think of it, I suppose, as practice acting courageously. Because courage is actually something you can practice. You can make yourself braver. Courage, along with justice and prudence and wisdom, one of the classical cardinal virtues. The most revered personal character traits one can possess. In classical and medieval philosophy, you can acquire more of these traits by practicing them till they become habitual. You become more just by practicing justice. Each act of justice makes you more likely to act justly. You become more prudent, or moderate, we would say, by acting prudentially and making prudent choices. The more prudent you are, the more prudent choices and decisions you make, the more prudent your behavior, the more likely you are to be prudential in the future. You gain wisdom by making good decisions, by learning important information and practicing virtues. And the wiser you behave, the more likely you are to become more and more wise. And the more you practice courage, the more you practice bravery, the more you practice acting courageously, the more likely you are to be brave next time courage is required. Being virtuous, especially being courageous, is difficult because few of us are inherently brave. Few of us are not inherently wise, just, or prudent either. We learn all these things as we grow. And exercising each of the virtues often requires overcoming adversity, but possibly not more so than courage, because courage or bravery implies that we're scared. Fortitude, the classical term used for courage, is to be able to do what's right, to do what's just, and to do what's wise, to do what love calls you to do what your values hold you to, no matter the obstacle. The more difficult the obstacle or circumstance, the harder it is to be brave. Eventually, the braver you become, you may reach a point where you no longer need to be brave about certain things that once required a lot of courage from you. Doing something that once required you to demonstrate gobs of courage may eventually not be that difficult anymore. It may no longer be a challenge to you to do what's right, hold to your ideals. But until then, there's that real annoying aspect of courage. You're not demonstrating courage if you're not scared. If you're not frightened, it's not bravery. If you're not scared of heights, climbing up the rock wall or going over a very tall bridge or peeking through the glass floor at the observation tower atop a skyscraper doesn't bother you. It doesn't require any bravery at all. But if you're terrified of heights, doing any of those things might require a whole lot of courage. So much so that you may need to work up to doing those things with a bunch of encouraging words and support and reassurances from others, a lot of pacing to some high-energy psych-yourself-up music. Unfortunately, courage requires fear. As I said, that's annoying. Because this is true, Each of us needs to be brave to varying degrees at different times in different situations about different things. What may require an immense amount of courage from you may not be a big deal to me. It is difficult to get through a single day without needing to be a little brave over something. So I challenge you this month to practice being brave. Practice acting courageously. Practice courage. One way to think about this might be reflect on your own comfort zones and how you might step out of one. Go outside your usual lines. Maybe do something you've been putting off for a while for fear of a certain outcome. Learning a new skill, having a difficult conversation. Practicing courage does not require, and I am not asking you to, confront a major phobia or traumatize yourself. Work up to it. Start small. And there are dozens of opportunities for us in our lives, week to week, day to day, to take a chance, to try something new, to get out of a comfort zone long established. Start small, and after a while of practicing, you will notice you're being a little braver about more difficult things. That's how it works. Before long, if you take up this challenge, you'll be ready to up the ante a bit. Face a little bit more pronounced a fear or a more long-standing anxiety. Unfortunately, being anxious, scared, nervous, it's required for courage. Over the last few years, our Unitarian Universalist Association has asked us to step out of one of our comfort zones. We've been challenged, especially since 2017, to deepen our understanding of racism, what it is, how it works, and how to be better anti-racist. We've been challenged to deepen our understanding of white supremacy, its culture, what it is, how it works, and how to better dismantle it in the association, but also at the level of our congregations. One of the ways the committee who wrote Widening the Circle of Concern recommended to congregations for doing this is to do a multicultural audit. And that's what I'm going to present to us today, is a way we might do that. The Unitarian Universalist Association is currently in the middle of a multi-year process reviewing Article 2 of our bylaws. I talked to you about this last year. And we started it at General Assembly this year. And you may have heard a little bit about this already. But Article 2 is where we find our principles and purposes, the values that hold member congregations in covenant, in association with the other congregations. And part of this review is going to be taking a vote on a proposed 8th principle, a draft of which says, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and other institutions. It's important for us, especially, as white Unitarian Universalists, to hold ourselves accountable to doing this work, to do what we can in practice to improve. They suggest that some of this might be having a people of color caucus if there are enough people within a congregation or within a region or within the UUA itself to discern and express needs and concerns to the rest of the community. Blue, Black Lives of UU, has been doing this over the last couple of years by helping each other as UUs of color be accountable and also help the association be accountable and recognize and dismantle signs of internalized racism. We need an effective mechanism or structure to help us do this. And likewise for other oppressions. I believe this is a little bit of what Anita talked about last week. Did I get that correct? Yes? So I wanted to get that in there because it jumps off of what we're going to try. Now, the overwhelming majority, I believe, of white Unitarian Universalists hear this and go, yeah, that makes sense. But doing that is a lot harder than just going, yeah, that makes sense. And a major reason for this is what we've learned is called white fragility. It's emotionally difficult. It's scary to be brave, right? All humans are fragile, emotional creatures. When our emotional fragility is due to how our whiteness and emotional equilibrium are tied together over issues of race, that's called white fragility. But there are gobs of other human fragilities, right? Anytime you're required to have courage or be brave and you're anxious or nervous about something, we all tend to get a little emotionally fragile. And if you wrap that around whatever the situation is about, you've got blank fragility, right? It's a human thing. I think a lot of white people get really tense over the whole concept of white fragility, right? That it's only white people who do this and only over this. No, but in this particular instance, this is the fragility we're dealing with. Does that make sense? So, white fragility is an example of why we need to be courageous when we do anti-racist work. Being anti-racist white people means having to find courage to deal with fear and anxiety and obstacles of unlearning what we've subconsciously been taught and what we may have consciously picked up about white supremacy and racism. And even for those of us who want to do this work, being anti-racist white people often calls us to be courageous because it's not brave if you're not scared. We all have blind spots as human beings. And we have blind spots as white people around issues of race. That's just due to the privilege you have of being white. Whatever your privilege is, it's like having a blind spot of that area, right? Right? Straight people have blind spots about homophobia. Men can have blind spots about sexism, and so on and so on. So one of the things that we're going to try and do as Unitarian Universalists is to learn about and face this blind spot together and try and get a sense of just how good we're actually doing at being anti-racist and multicultural so that we can learn to do better. So I want to offer us as individuals, and more importantly, I think for us collectively as a congregation, a way to find out just where we're at in our quest to be radically welcoming, anti-racist, and multicultural. And before I go into anything else, spoiler alert, we're probably not doing as well as we want to be. Other spoiler alert, we're probably not failing so miserably we're going to hang our heads for 6 months, okay? So try and get a sense of equilibrium about what I'm about to go into, okay? We can't be accountable to doing this work until we have some kind of accurate assessment of where we're starting from, because that helps us learn what we can do next. What's next for us to learn, try, grow, experience. So I'm going to suggest, and I talked about this a little bit last year too, but now it's time to do it, so I'm going to go over it again. I'd like us to take the Intercultural Development Inventory, the IDI. It's a 50-question assessment that you take online by answering 50 multiple-choice questions. And the IDI is considered to be cross-culturally the best tool of its kind available. A lot of research, and it's all listed online on their website, many, many well-done scientific studies. It's had a lot of research that's gone into how to present this assessment across various cultures and languages so it gives you as accurate an assessment in Bali as in Mexico, as in Germany, as in Connecticut. that ream of research in itself I found fairly impressive. So what the IDI does with this 50-question questionnaire is it measures where you fall on a developmental scale of cross-cultural, or you could say intercultural competence. One's ability for understanding and appropriately responding to cultural differences in values, beliefs, perceptions, emotional response, and behavior. The Intercultural Development Inventory will give us an accurate sense of how well we are able to operate as a congregation from a multicultural mindset, which will be extraordinarily useful to us in areas of our programming, in our community involvement, and Sunday services, and our social justice work. We committed to continued improvement in terms of how actively we welcome diverse people to our congregation, help them feel at home. It's human nature to overestimate our abilities in this area. And the same is true for organizations. Organizations tend to overestimate their abilities in this area as well. In addition to obvious areas of multiculturalism, such as anti-racism and anti-oppression work, the IDI will also teach us how well we're able to understand and work with each other and communicate with each other across different spiritual cultures, which as Unitarian Universalists is important to us because we bring a whole wide range of spiritual outlooks into the room with us, doing anything when we're together. So it will help us understand each other in terms of where we're each coming from. Those who grew up Catholic, for example, or those who grew up and still identify as Jewish, or those who take a more humanistic or philosophical or scientific approach, or those who take an earth-centered or pagan approach, and so on. This is going to provide insight and recommendations for how to better relate to each other across those different cultural aspects of spirituality. Like many developmental models, the IDI uses a scale, and they claim that everyone passes through it developmentally, that no one just starts off over here. You progress through it developmentally. No one skips stages. Although we can, and most people do, regress from time to time from the stage they have climbed up to a stage that's lower down the scale. That's just common, and it happens to everybody. So this is the scale they came up with. On one end of the spectrum is the denial orientation. People operating out of denial deny, dismiss, and avoid differences. All lives matter, for example. They see different others as stereotypes, avoid interaction with people who are different, and are disinterested in broadening their perspectives. They usually have little or no experience in dealing with others who are different from themselves. Next along the spectrum is what they call polarization in the IDI. And those with this orientation see cultural differences as an us versus them battle. The others are usually seen as inferior, but sometimes the reverse is true. The polarized may even support the cause or causes of oppressed minorities, but have no understanding about the cause itself from the other perspective. Kind of in the middle of the spectrum is what they call minimization. The middle ground between a monocultural perspective and a multicultural perspective. Minimization tends to flatten out differences. It emphasizes human similarity and common values. And this takes a couple different forms. One is the I don't see color, or all people are exactly the same, right? Which allows a dominant cultural group to neglect the non-dominant group's experiences and perspectives. But the other, and can be as equally problematic, is the go along to get along approach. Because if you're a minority cultural group, sometimes for your own safety, you have to operate out of minimization to avoid conflict, to ensure survival. The next piece along the spectrum they call acceptance. People with the acceptance orientation recognize and appreciate patterns of cultural difference and commonality in their own and other cultures. They're curious to learn how a cultural pattern of behavior makes sense within different cultural communities and contexts. This involves self-reflection between one's own culturally learned perceptions and behaviors and the perceptions and practices of different cultures. While curious, individuals operating from this orientation are not fully able to appropriately adapt to all cultural differences. They may be able to make ethical or moral decisions in their own cultural framework, but not in another. For example, something that illustrates this would be somebody operating out of acceptance may see a woman wearing a hijab and automatically assume they're oppressed. Right? Not necessarily the case. So that's an example of that. And at the other far end of the spectrum, the far end of the multicultural perspective, is what they call adaptation. And people with this orientation make two adaptations. Cognitive frame shifting. You're able to shift your cultural perspective and behavior, and code shifting. You're able to change your behavior in authentic and culturally appropriate ways, in manners of speech and other cultural aspects. And this enables deep cultural bridging and cross-cultural understanding. The biggest challenge for those in the adaptation perspective is to not dismiss those who aren't at the same level of perspective. Oh, those stupid minimizers, if they'd only get with it, right? Well, by doing that, you're jumping back yourself, right? They can be overly intolerant of the intolerant. So how's that so far? Is that a good enough summary? People kind of get what that's doing? Okay, because it's a lot. It really is a lot. The next thing to understand about this tool is that it's a tool, it's not a test. You don't take the IDI to measure how much of a jerk you are. You don't take it to measure how much of a racist you are. You don't take it to measure how much of a homophobe you are, right? You take it to get a sense of how well you're actually doing and what you can do to get better. Because all of us can always get better. The people who work with the IDI at the IDI do a lot of work with people who end up at the great positive end of the scale in finding ways to get better. Because you're not done once you come out on that part of the spectrum, right? There's still a lot more to do. It gives participants who take this assessment an accurate sense of how good, how successfully, how well they understand and engage and communicate with people of different cultures. Because of this, it's a tool that helps individuals and groups understand how they do with this and how to get better. In order for us to do this, it would require all of us taking the assessment. Because what it does is it aggregates everyone's in the group score to show us where our median is and where our extremes are. Because what they found is in a group setting, a university, a company, that teaching how to improve to the middle of your own spectrum in your group is most effective at improving everyone's abilities. Now, in order for us to do this, it means we need as many people as possible to individually take the assessment. If you're nervous about taking the assessment, here's a little extra information. If you want to take the assessment, you don't have to know what your individual outcome was. And the only people who will know about it is the computer that runs the scores. If you would like to know about your individual score, you can let us know that, and then the only other person who will know will be me as the administrator. And then we can do one of two things. I can give you your assessment, or I can go over with you and work on how to improve, what you can do next to learn, get better. The cost is minimal. The most expensive part of doing the IDI is you have to use one of their licensed facilitators, right, which can cost a lot of money. So last spring, I took the training. So that cuts out thousands of dollars from the cost. And the only cost we're left with is the nonprofit cost of each person taking the assessment, which is $23. And so what I'd like to propose is we all take the assessment. If you can afford the $23 to pay for your own assessment, great. That will help us out a great deal. If you're willing to take the assessment, but that's steep, and for some people that's okay. Just get a hold of me. I'll find the funding somewhere for you. I'm good at that. Right? It's not that much. I'll find it. In order for us to get a good assessment of the group, the IDI says we really need at least 75%, ideally 85% of the people we're actively working with, right? I mean, about 85% of whatever our numbers are here today, to really get the most realistic look at where we're at. So what I'd like to propose is that if you're willing to participate, get in touch with me and let me know. And when you do that, let me know if you can afford to pay the $23 or not. When I get enough responses that I know we're past 75, I'll start waiting for 85. And when we get there, we'll arrange all the details. If we don't get there, we can talk about whether or not we'd want to wait till we get there or we want to do it with the 78% of us, which I think would still be a good idea for us myself. How does that sound to everybody? Good? And the reason I bring it up to you is that last year, Moose, which is the other congregation I work with, the Mattatucky Youth Society in Woodbury, they decided to put it into their plan for this year to do it, which is one of the reasons I got trained last year. But since working with two groups, the easiest way to do something if you're both doing it is at the same time. Now is the time to start talking to you about it as well. So that's what I would like to do. And we can leave it at that for right now. Let everyone who's interested just get in touch with me and say, yes, I'm in, and I can pay the $23, or yes, I'm in, it would help me if you found the $23. And I'm the only one who's going to know about that request, so you don't have to worry about anybody else knowing that, right? Of course, one of the acts of bravery we all engage in is open honesty about our own financial situation, right? That's yet another place where we all practice courage in our culture. All right. I will make available in the newsletter with links, places you can go to watch videos and read things online so you can learn as much about this as you would like ahead of time. Okay? And when we have the numbers, we'll take the next steps of scheduling things. And what will happen is you will get sent to you a specific personal login to go online and take the assessment. And your results will be plugged into our group's situation with the IDI. If you tell me you would like to know your own personal results, what will also happen at that time is a copy of your results will not only be emailed to you, but also to me as the facilitator. And I am the only one who will see it besides you. What can be fabulously enlightening is to be courageous enough to share with each other what our assessment was as individuals. And then work together. Like if you and 3 other people came out in the same place, you might work together on things you can do to get better. Right? It's really hard to say where you're going to come out in the assessment. But remember, it's not a test. The first time I took this assessment was 20 years ago, 2002. I was running a volunteer program for the Little Sisters of the Assumption, an order of very liberal Catholic nuns based out in Harlem in New York City. And they sent me to a national conference on religious volunteer programs. And part of what we did was the IDI. And being young, idealistic guy that I was, I thought I was going to do so well. And my score was so middling. When I got trained, I had to take it again. And I had to work up the courage to take again. I was terrified I was going to do worse or no better, right? That I hadn't learned anything in 20 years. I was terrified. That took a lot of courage to do it again. I was really scared. I was like, oh my God, I've been doing lots of this kind of stuff for 20 years. If I've not learned anything yet, I'm going to be so, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to get so upset. Luckily, I had moved along, okay? And generally, that's what happens. If people get a sense of how they're doing, then there's something concrete you can do to learn how to do better. Like we learn anything. And when you learn and you do better, then you're better. And that's all we're being asked to do by the UUA, is get a sense of how we're doing and do better. We're not being asked to be perfect. We're not being asked to never make mistakes. That's irresponsible, and it's not going to happen. All we're being asked to do is engage and learn and get better. And I think this can really help us. I've been very impressed with it. I had forgotten about the tool completely for 20 years. And last year, when Lynn Ford, who was a member here, and then was the intern minister at Moose the last couple years, when Moose last year was looking for things to help them do a multicultural audit, we were finding real consultants who did this cost way too much money for us. And we were running into roadblocks of various kinds about being able to afford it or find somebody to help us. And that's when Lynn suggested, hey, at Meadville, our UU seminary, they now make all the students take it upon entrance. And so she talked about it to me, and the more she talked, the more I'm thinking, this sounds familiar. This sounds familiar. And then finally, my old person, memory kicked in, and my fading memory was able to call up the fact that, oh, I'd actually done this before. And I redug up my old score and the papers they gave me. I'd kept them all these years with a lot of other stuff that's similar. And I had to live through, once again, being very average. And not as good as I wanted to be then. I'm like, oh, that's probably why I forgot about it. And then all my anxieties started to pile up as I got closer and closer to taking the thing again for the training. So it's natural to be anxious because all of us have to show courage in different degrees about different things. Some of you may be real anxious about doing this. Some of you may be like, oh, that's cool, it's no big deal, I'll try that. And some of you will be in between. That's okay. Part of what we're trying to do here is to make it okay to be who you are where you're at and get better. That's all any of us can do about anything. And if we do it together, one, it's easier, and two, it's usually more fun. And then maybe we'll start seeing how we might actually really do better at that call we all believe in as Unitarian Universalists to be more widely inclusive, to actually having a more widely inclusive community in the room on Sundays and at other events. And that's a goal worth shooting for, I think. When we get the assessment completed and we're all ready to talk about it again, I'll go over it with the Social Justice Committee because I know it will impact their work learning all this stuff. And I'll brief the board about it. But the first time I'll really go into every detail is when we all get together as a group. Is that fair? About how we're doing. Individuals will never be discussed. It's only about how we're doing as a group, right? All right. So that's what we're going to do. I hope you will accept my spiritual challenge for this month and practice bravery. And I hope one of the ways you will practice bravery is by taking the IDI assessment. Thanks for watching this sermon. I'd really love to hear what you think about it, so leave a comment, and I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe to the channel and share it with others. Thanks a lot.